Good evening. Settle in, dim the lights, and let the noise of your world fade away. Tonight we travel to a place tucked away in the dense, ancient forests of northern Maine, a small town called Havenridge. From the outside, it is a picture of American tranquility. Old colonial houses with peeling paint, a single main street where everyone knows your name, and a silence so profound you can almost hear the pine needles dropping in the woods. But silence, as we know, can hide the most unsettling of truths. And in Havenridge, the silence is beginning to forget. Our story begins not in the town itself, but in a sterile white office in Boston, with a manila folder labeled simply Havenridge, Anomaly. The folder lands on the desk of FBI Special Agent Marcus Thorne. Thorne wasn't a man for anomalies. He was a man of facts, of evidence, of cold, hard logic. At 42, his face was a roadmap of solved cases and sleepless nights. He specialized in the bizarre, the cases that other agents dismissed as pranks or local folklore. But this was different. The report was thin. It spoke of a series of calls to the state police from a handful of Havenridge residents. The calls were disjointed, filled with a quiet panic. A woman claimed her husband of 20 years didn't remember their wedding day. A shopkeeper found his own handwriting in a ledger describing a week of sales he had no memory of making. A teenager woke up with a trophy on his shelf for a competition he couldn't recall entering, let alone winning. The local doctor had ruled out any known medical cause. It was a slow, creeping amnesia, selective and spreading like a quiet contagion. Thorne packed a single bag. He drove his unremarkable black sedan north, leaving the city skyline behind for the endless canopy of the Maine wilderness. The further he drove, the more the radio signal crackled and died, until the only sound was the hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind through the trees. After 6 hours, a simple wooden sign emerged from the gloom. Welcome to Havenridge, population 512. As he drove down Main Street, he felt it, a strange sense of stillness. It wasn't just quiet, it was a lack of presence. People moved on the sidewalks, they entered the general store, they tended to their gardens, but their eyes seemed distant, vacant, as if they were actors on a stage, going through the motions of a play they'd forgotten the lines to. He parked in front of the sheriff's office, a small brick building that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. He took a deep breath, the air crisp with the scent of pine and something else, something faintly metallic, like ozone after a storm. The investigation had begun, and the silence of Havenridge was about to be broken. The man who greeted Agent Thorne inside the sheriff's office was Sheriff Brody, a large man whose uniform seemed a size too small and whose face was etched with a deep, weary confusion. He shook Thorne's hand, his grip surprisingly limp. "Agent Thorne," he began, his voice raspy. "I'm not sure what to tell you. It's quiet here, too quiet." Thorne got straight to the point. "Tell me about the calls, Sheriff. Start with the first one." Brody sighed, running a hand over his balding head. "Martha Patterson called 3 days ago, said her husband, Bill, didn't recognize the family dog, a golden retriever they've had for 10 years. Bill just stared at it, no recognition, like it was a stray that had wandered in. When she pressed him, he got agitated, said he'd never seen the dog before in his life." "And you went to see them?" Thorne asked, his eyes scanning the room. noting the dust on the file cabinets, the outdated map of the county on the wall. "I did," Brody confirmed. "Bill seemed fine, a little on the edge maybe. I asked him about the dog, Buster. He just shrugged, told me Martha was getting old and confused. But the look in his eyes, Agent, it was blank, not like he was lying, like the memory just wasn't there. An empty file in his head." Thorne spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the other reports. They were all disturbingly similar. Minor personal memories erased clean. A cherished family recipe, the name of a first love, the feeling of a first kiss. Intimate details that defined a person, plucked away one by one. It wasn't just forgetting, it was a hollowing out. As evening fell, casting long, distorted shadows across Main Street, Thorne decided to visit the local diner. It was the only place still open, a small beacon of light and warmth against the encroaching darkness of the forest. The diner was half full, but the patrons ate in a strange, subdued silence. There was no chatter, no laughter, just the clinking of cutlery and the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. He sat at the counter, and a young waitress with tired eyes approached him. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice a monotone. Thorne nodded. As she poured, he noticed a faint silvery scar on the back of her hand, thin and perfectly straight, almost like a surgical incision. He glanced around. The cook behind the counter had one just like it, on his neck, just below his ear. The man eating a slice of pie in the corner booth had one too, on his wrist, barely visible beneath his watch. They all had them, identical, pale, silvery lines. He looked down at his own hands, then back at the waitress. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low. She looked at him, and for a fleeting moment a flicker of confusion crossed her face. She opened her mouth to speak, then hesitated. I don't remember," she whispered, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning fear. The hum of the light seemed to grow louder, filling the silence in the diner, a sound like a distant, unseen machine.
A wave of cold shock silenced the diner. The waitress, her name now a ghost in her own mind, stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. The man in the corner booth dropped his fork with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the tense quiet. Everyone was staring, not at the waitress, but at Agent Thorne. His question, so simple, had acted as a key, unlocking a door in their minds that they didn't even know was there. And behind it, it was nothing but a void. Thorne kept his composure, but his mind was racing. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This was controlled, coordinated. The scars, the selective memory loss, the vacant expressions, it all pointed to some kind of external influence. He stood up slowly, placing a $20 bill on the counter. "It's all right," he said, his voice a calm anchor in their sea of confusion. "It'll come back to you." But he knew it was a lie. He walked out of the diner into the cold night air, the bell on the door chiming a final, mournful note. He needed to get out of the open. He felt watched. The dark windows of the houses on Main Street seemed like eyes, and the rustling of leaves in the forest sounded like whispers. He got back in his car and drove to the only motel in town, a small, run-down establishment called the Pine View. The man at the front desk moved with the same slow, disconnected gait as the others. He, too, had the silvery scar peeking out from the collar of his shirt. Thorne paid in cash, took the key to room 7, and locked the door behind him. His motel room was small and smelled of damp wood and disinfectant. He didn't turn on the main light, using only the small lamp on his bedside table. He pulled the curtains shut, but not before scanning the tree line at the edge of the property. Was something moving out there, or was it just his imagination? He opened his briefcase on the bed, but he didn't pull out files. He pulled out a small, specialized device, a broadband frequency scanner. He'd brought it as a precaution, a tool for cases involving strange electronic interference. He switched it on. The device was silent for a moment, the needle on its display hovering at 0. Then it began to twitch, slowly at first, then more erratically. A low, rhythmic pulse filled the room from the device's small speaker. Beep, beep, beep. It was a signal, faint but undeniably present. It wasn't a radio broadcast. It wasn't a cell signal, as there was no reception this far out. It was something else, something clean, structured, and completely alien. He began to sweep the room, and the signal grew stronger as he approached the window. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the deep, dark woods that surrounded Havenridge like a cage. And as he watched the needle on the scanner pulse in time with the unheard rhythm, he finally understood. The town wasn't just sick, it was being broadcast to. The signal was a heartbeat, a steady, synthetic pulse washing over the town, as invisible and pervasive as the air itself. Thorne stood motionless in the dark motel room, the scanner in his hand, the only thing connecting him to the horrifying reality of the situation. This frequency, it wasn't designed to communicate. It was designed to interface, to rewrite. He now saw the town not as a collection of victims, but as a field of receivers, their minds tuned to a broadcast from an unknown station. The silvery scars were the connection points, the biological antennas for this ghostly transmission. He had to get to the source. The signal was strongest from the direction of the woods, specifically from a ridge deep within the forest known locally as Black Creek Ridge. According to the old county map in the sheriff's office, it was an undeveloped, heavily wooded area, the perfect place to hide something, the perfect place for a transmitter. Thorne didn't wait for morning. Waiting was a luxury he no longer had. Every pulse of that silent signal could be erasing another memory, another piece of a person's soul. He exchanged his suit jacket for a dark, tactical field jacket, checked his standard issue sidearm, and grabbed a high-powered flashlight. He left the motel room, slipping out the back door and melting into the shadows at the edge of the parking lot. The woods were a black wall in front of him, impenetrable and menacing. Entering the forest was like stepping into another world. The air grew colder, and the faint sounds of the town vanished, replaced by the crack of twigs under his feet and the whisper of the wind in the unseen canopy above. He navigated by compass and the growing strength of the signal from his scanner, which he now kept in his pocket, its rhythmic beeping a private guide through the oppressive darkness. After an hour of tense hiking, the terrain began to slope upwards. He was nearing the ridge. The signal was strong now, the beeps from his scanner so frequent they were almost a continuous tone. And then he saw it. Through a break in the trees, a faint, unnatural light was pulsing, casting a sickly green glow against the underside of the leaves. It pulsed in perfect sync with the signal. He dropped to a crouch, drawing his weapon, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He moved forward slowly, tree by tree, until he reached the edge of a clearing. What he saw there made the cold night air freeze in his lungs. It wasn't a transmitter, not a machine of wires and steel. In the center of the clearing stood a tall, slender, organic structure. It looked like a plant, or perhaps a fungus, that had grown out of the earth, reaching at least 20 feet into the air. Its surface was a pale, bioluminescent white. And it was from this impossible life form that the green light was pulsing. And it wasn't alone. Moving around its base were figures. They were tall, impossibly thin, their limbs moving with a fluid insect-like grace. They weren't human. They were tending to the strange, glowing plant, their silhouettes stark and terrifying against its alien light. Thorne had found the source. He had found the gardeners of Havenridge's empty memories.
Thorne's breath hitched. His mind, trained for human threats, struggled to process the unearthly sight before him. These weren't men in costumes. These weren't some elaborate hoax. This was real. The figures moved with a chilling efficiency, their elongated fingers meticulously adjusting something on the surface of the glowing plant structure. He could now make out more details in the eerie green light. Their heads were smooth, without hair or discernible features beyond large, dark, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. They were the architects of Havenridge's amnesia, the quiet, meticulous harvesters of human memory. He realized the scale of the operation. This wasn't just about a few forgotten wedding dates. This was a systematic, ongoing process, a profound, silent invasion. The people of Havenridge weren't just losing memories, their minds were being actively re-engineered, perhaps to serve an unknown purpose, or simply as a grotesque form of study. And the silvery scars, he knew now, they were points of interface, where the alien frequencies directly connected to the human nervous system. One of the figures, taller than the others, paused in its work. Its smooth head tilted slightly, as if listening. Thorn froze, pressing himself further into the damp earth, barely daring to breathe. Had it heard him? His scanner, clutched in his hand, was now completely silent, the signal overwhelming its sensitive circuits. He was too close. The figure turned slowly, its dark, featureless eyes sweeping across the clearing, passing directly over Thorn's hiding spot. For a terrifying moment, their gazes almost met. Thorn felt a prickling sensation on his skin, a cold, alien presence brushing against his mind. It was an intelligence so profound, so utterly foreign, that it threatened to shatter his own sense of self. He fought against it, clamping down on his thoughts, his training screaming at him to remain invisible. The alien paused for another unnerving moment, then turned back to the glowing plant, continuing its work as if nothing had happened. Thorn released a slow, silent breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had been seen, or at least felt. They knew he was there. He needed proof, something tangible that he could take back, something that wouldn't be dismissed as the ramblings of a sleep-deprived agent. His eyes darted around the clearing. Near the base of the main plant structure, there were smaller, darker nodes, almost like offshoots. One of them seemed to be emanating a faint, low hum, distinct from the primary source. It looked detachable. With calculated movements, Thorn began to creep, slowly, silently, around the perimeter of the clearing, keeping to the deepest shadows. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like an explosion in the terrifying silence. He reached the edge closest to the smaller node. He had one chance. He took a deep breath, preparing to move. Just as he was about to break cover, a low, guttural growl ripped through the night air, not from the aliens, but from the darkness behind him. It was a sound of pure, feral rage. He whipped around, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Standing there, just 10 feet away, was a creature he hadn't seen in any reports, something not of this world, yet born of this terrifying experiment. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its form was grotesquely twisted, a nightmarish fusion of human and animal, writhing with pain and fury. It was a failed experiment, and it was hungry. The creature lunged. It wasn't just a growl. It was a shriek of agony and pure animalistic fury. Thorn, instincts honed by years of facing human monsters, reacted in a split second. He brought up his sidearm, the cold steel, a sudden comfort in the face of the impossible. The creature was fast, a blur of distorted flesh and gnashing teeth. It was a victim of this alien presence, transformed into a weapon, a grotesque guardian of the clearing. He fired. The gunshot ripped through the silent night, an impossibly loud sound that instantly shattered the eerie calm. The creature staggered, a pained yelp escaping its throat, but it didn't fall. It simply shook its head, its glowing eyes locking onto Thorn with renewed, terrifying intensity. The bullet had done little more than infuriate it further. This was no ordinary animal, no ordinary human. The sound of the gunshot had another, more immediate effect. In the clearing, the slender alien figures stopped their work. Their smooth, featureless heads turned in unison towards the source of the noise. Their dark eyes, previously impassive, now radiated an unnerving focus. Thorn had broken their silence, revealed his presence to both the failed experiment and its horrifying creators. He was caught between two impossible threats. He knew he couldn't fight both. The creature was closing in, its claws tearing at the undergrowth. The aliens, though seemingly unarmed, possessed an unknown psychic threat. His primary objective hadn't changed: get proof. He had to reach that smaller, humming node. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Thorn didn't retreat. He charged forward, straight past the attacking creature, directly towards the glowing plant structure. It was a reckless, desperate gamble. The creature, caught off guard by his sudden change of direction, lunged again, its claws raking the air inches behind him. He felt the wind of its attack, heard the sickening snick of bone against wood as it slammed into a tree. He dove for the smaller node, his fingers scrabbling at its smooth, organic surface. It felt strangely warm, vibrating with a low internal hum. He pulled, twisted, and with a sickening crack, it tore free from the main structure. It was about the size of his forearm, pulsating faintly with its own internal light. He had it. But the aliens were moving. With an unnerving speed, they glided towards him, their long, impossibly thin arms extending. He could feel their mental presence pressing in, a wave of cold, calculated intent that threatened to overwhelm his senses. He clutched the node, rolled, and scrambled back, the mutated creature now recovering and snarling behind him. He was trapped. The aliens in front, the monster behind. And then a flicker of light. A movement in the very edge of the clearing caught his eye. Something else was here, something that didn't belong to either group.
Thorn barely registered the new presence. His body was coiled, ready to react, his mind focused on survival. The creature was a snarling, twisted mass of flesh and rage, its claws extended. The aliens were closing in, their silent advance more terrifying than any scream. He braced himself for impact, the small humming node clutched tightly in his hand, his only proof of this impossible night. But the new presence didn't target Thorn. Instead, a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, moving with a speed and fluidity that rivaled the aliens. It was human, or at least appeared to be. Dressed in dark, nondescript tactical gear, its face obscured by a hood and a specialized mask. In its hands, it held a weapon that hummed with an otherworldly energy, unlike anything Thorn had ever seen. Without a word, the figure raised its weapon and fired, not at the mutated creature, but at the aliens. A focused beam of iridescent blue energy shot across the clearing, striking one of the slender figures. The alien shrieked, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, and its body contorted, then dissolved into a cloud of sparkling green dust that was instantly absorbed by the glowing plant structure. The remaining aliens paused, their silent assault momentarily broken. Their dark eyes, now radiating an intensity Thorn could almost feel, turned towards the new arrival. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a battle between factions, a hidden war playing out in the dark forests of Maine. "Move," a low synthesized voice hissed from behind the mask. It was directed at Thorn. Now. Thorn didn't need to be told twice. This was his chance. He scrambled backwards, keeping low, the smaller node still firmly in his grasp. The mutated creature, momentarily forgotten in the larger conflict, let out a frustrated roar and turned its attention back to Thorn. But before it could lunge, the masked figure fired again. This time, the blue energy beam struck the creature directly. It screamed, a long, agonizing sound that was abruptly cut short as it too disintegrated into shimmering dust that was instantly absorbed by the glowing plant structure. The remaining aliens paused, their silent assault momentarily broken. Their dark eyes, now radiating an intensity Thorn could almost feel, turned towards the new arrival. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a battle between factions, a hidden war playing out in the dark forests of Maine. "Move," a low synthesized voice hissed from behind the mask. It was directed at Thorn. Now. Thorn didn't need to be told twice. This was his chance. He scrambled backwards, keeping low, the smaller node still firmly in his grasp. The mutated creature, momentarily forgotten in the larger conflict, let out a frustrated roar and turned its attention back to Thorn. But before it could lunge, the masked figure fired again. This time, the blue energy beam struck the creature directly. It screamed, a long, agonizing sound that was abruptly cut short as it too disintegrated into shimmering dust that was instantly absorbed by the glowing plant structure. The remaining aliens reacted with a coordinated, almost telepathic surge of energy. A wave of raw psychic force slammed into the masked figure, causing them to stagger. Thorn felt the distant echo of it, a cold, crushing pressure against his own mind. But the figure held its ground, returning fire, systematically dissolving the alien presence one by one. "Don't just stand there, Agent. Run! The portal is destabilizing. Get out of here." Portal? Thorn's mind reeled. He glanced back at the glowing plant structure. It was indeed changing, the green light flickering erratically, and the air around it shimmered with an unnatural haze. He realized that the plant wasn't just a transmitter, it was a conduit, a gateway. He had been so focused on the memory loss, he hadn't considered the larger game at play. He had no time to ask questions. He turned and ran, plunging back into the dark woods, the sounds of the energy weapon and the alien shrieks echoing behind him, the small humming node still tightly clutched in his hand. He didn't know who his rescuer was or why they were here, but he knew one thing: Havenridge was just the beginning. Thorn ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, the small alien node a strange pulsing weight in his hand. He didn't stop until the sounds of the battle had faded completely, replaced only by the frantic pounding of his own heart and the rustling of leaves in the pre-dawn wind. He stumbled out of the woods near the highway, miles from where he had entered, his car a distant memory. The rising sun cast long, weak shadows, revealing the exhaustion etched onto his face. He found an old, abandoned logging road and collapsed against a moss-covered log, finally allowing himself to process the impossible events of the night. He had seen it all: the memory-erasing plant, the silent insectoid aliens, the grotesque mutated creature, and the mysterious masked figure with the energy weapon. Each piece was more unbelievable than the last, and yet he had physical proof. The small, humming node, still warm against his palm. It was alive, vibrating with an internal energy, and emanating a faint, almost imperceptible low-frequency hum that he could now detect without his scanner. This was the source of Havenridge's amnesia, a miniature version of the larger, portal-like structure. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The aliens were not just studying memory, they were harvesting it, altering it, perhaps for a purpose he couldn't yet comprehend. The silvery scars on the townsfolk were clearly implantation sites, direct connections to the alien broadcast. And the masked figure? Who were they? Another faction? A secret government agency far beyond the FBI's classification? Or perhaps something even more mysterious, a protector operating from the shadows of a hidden war? He knew one thing for sure: the official report would never be believed. He couldn't go back to Sheriff Brody, a man already caught in the alien's subtle web. He couldn't call his superiors; they would deem him insane. He was alone, armed with a piece of alien technology and a truth too terrifying to speak aloud. Havenridge wasn't just a local mystery, it was ground zero for something far greater, a silent psychological war for human consciousness. As the sun fully rose, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Thorn knew his life and his understanding of reality had irreversibly changed. He was no longer just an FBI agent. He was a witness, a carrier of a secret that could unravel everything humanity thought it knew. He had to get this proof, this alien device, to someone who would believe him, someone who could understand. But who? And how far did this conspiracy truly reach? He looked down at the humming node in his hand. It held not just the key to Havenridge's forgotten memories, but potentially the fate of the entire world.
The quiet hum of the alien node in his hand was a constant reminder of the impossible truth he now carried.
Thorne couldn't return to the system he had always trusted. The secrecy around Havenridge was too profound, the implications too vast. If the aliens could erase memories so easily, who was to say they hadn't already infiltrated higher levels of government, of law enforcement? He was on his own. His first priority was to get out of Maine, to find a place where he could think, analyze, and make contact with someone outside the compromised channels. He began walking, following the logging road, until it eventually met a quiet state highway. Hours later, he managed to hitch a ride with a kindly elderly trucker heading south, a man oblivious to the alien device hidden deep in Thorne's backpack. During the long, silent journey, Thorne formulated a plan. He remembered a name, Dr. Eris Thorne. No relation, but a renowned, if controversial, theoretical physicist and astrophysicist who had recently left a prestigious university position under a cloud of speculation. Dr. Thorne had become an outspoken critic of mainstream science's dismissal of UFO phenomena, and even published several papers on exotic energy signatures that eerily mirrored what Thorne had experienced in Havenridge. He was a long shot, a maverick, but he was also the only person Thorne could think of who might even begin to comprehend what he had witnessed. Dr. Eris Thorne lived a secluded life in a remote cabin in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, having effectively vanished from academic circles. Finding him would be a challenge, but Thorne knew it was his only option. He spent the next few days in a blur of bus terminals and anonymous motels, never staying in one place for too long, always feeling the unseen eyes of Havenridge upon him. He carefully studied the alien node, noting how its light subtly changed color in response to ambient energy fields, and how its hum seemed to resonate with a primal, almost biological rhythm. It was a tool, a weapon, and a key, all in one. Finally, after piecing together sparse online clues and old news articles, Thorne arrived in a small, isolated mountain town. From there, he knew he had to proceed with extreme caution. He shed his suit, purchasing rugged hiking gear and a worn pickup truck from a dusty lot. He felt like a ghost, an agent off the grid, carrying a secret that could break the world. As he drove the winding, unpaved roads deeper into the mountains, the reception on his burner phone died. He was truly alone now, relying on instinct and the faint, almost imperceptible guidance of the alien device in his bag. He was heading towards Dr. Thorne's last known location, a cluster of coordinates that felt more like a myth than a real place. The sun began to set, casting long, purple shadows over the ancient peaks. He knew the risks were immense, that he was walking into the unknown, but the blank, vacant eyes of the people of Havenridge spurred him onward. He would not let their silence be in vain. The old, battered pickup truck finally sputtered to a halt, out of gas, deep in a secluded hollow. Thorne got out, stretching his weary limbs. The air here was thin, crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Overhead, the stars were a dazzling, unfiltered canvas, unmarred by city lights. Following the directions scrawled on a faded map, he hiked the final mile on foot, the alien node in his backpack now vibrating with a noticeable, insistent hum growing stronger with every step. It was guiding him. He emerged into a small clearing dominated by a rustic yet surprisingly well-maintained cabin. Antennas of various shapes and sizes bristled from its roof, reaching towards the night sky like metallic trees. This was it. This was Dr. Eris Thorne's sanctuary. As Thorne approached the cabin, the front door creaked open. A man stepped out, his silhouette framed by the warm, inviting light from within. He was older, with a shock of wild white hair and keen, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He held a steaming mug in one hand and a pair of old, worn binoculars in the other. He looked directly at Agent Thorne. Then his gaze dropped to the backpack, to the subtle, almost imperceptible glow emanating from within. "You're late, Agent," Dr. Eris Thorne said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost as if he had been expecting him. "And you've brought a rather fascinating little friend with you." Thorne stopped, momentarily stunned. You knew?" Dr. Eris Thorne took a slow sip from his mug. "Let's just say I've been listening for a very long time, not just to the stars, but to the whispers between the signals, the silence that isn't truly silent. Havenridge wasn't the first, Agent. It won't be the last, but it is perhaps the most brazen." He gestured towards the cabin. "Come in, we have much to discuss. And that little device you're carrying, it has a story to tell, a story that might just change everything." As Thorne stepped across the threshold, he felt a strange sense of both relief and foreboding. He had found someone who believed, someone who understood, but the battle was far from over. The events in Havenridge were just a single, chilling chapter in a much larger cosmic narrative. The aliens, the silent war for human consciousness, the mysterious masked figures, all these threads were now poised to unravel a truth far stranger and more terrifying than any conspiracy theory. The hum of the alien node in his bag grew stronger, resonating with the intricate machinery inside Dr. Thorne's cabin. It was a beacon, a key, and a warning. The memories of Havenridge might have been forgotten by its inhabitants, but the secret of who or what had taken them was now out, and the silent war had just found a new, unexpected warrior.